This is the disappearance of Peggy Morrison, Part 1. This is a case I must warn you about. It's not an easy case to hear or see, and there will be many details that will be disturbing and morbid. There are a lot of sexual encounters and blunt confessions. It's a case that keeps you up at night. A case with so many twists and turns, you'll need a map so you won't get lost. This is the kind of case we call a dust collector. It's either so complex the daunting work ahead makes them keep it buried, or one of those crimes came about by someone who really knew what they were doing, or had insanely good luck when committing crimes. Peggy Morrison is many things to many people. She was 17 years old when she disappeared, but compared to most people, she lived many lifetimes in her short 17 years. What you see when you look at Peggy is not at all what you get. What you get depends on who you are and who you're talking to. Peggy Morrison may have been the victim in all of this, but to me, she is one of the greatest masterminds and one of the people I cannot forget out of my many years as a detective. Peggy never got closure in her life or a court ruling. We can never really know just what Peggy endured or how it all came to pass. But in her story is the key to who did it and why. Many theories have come to pass. What will yours be? But to make a choice, you must walk the scene from start to finish with me. My clock started running at 7 p.m. on Monday, June 1st, 1970. I was a rookie cop who had the lucky fortune to be riding with the chief of police. We responded to a farm, 1964 Farmers Land View Road in Morrisville, New York. There was a report of a missing 17-year-old high school senior named Peggy Morrison. Peggy was 5'5" and weighed roughly 120 to 130 pounds. She had strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes with light freckles sprinkled on her cheeks and nose. She was last seen wearing a jean skirt with a red belt and a red and pink striped t-shirt tucked in with white tennis shoes and a red purse. We reported to the farm at 7:30 on Monday, June 1st. The report was called in by her father, Paul Morrison. Peggy had failed to return home for her shift at their family farm, and she had still not made it home by dinner time. She also had not shown up for her math final that morning at school, even though her car was still parked at the school parking lot. She had made it to picking her friend Mary up at 9 a.m. that Monday morning for their math final. Mary lived 1 mile up the road. They drove the 15 minutes into the town of Morrisville and stopped at the local diner, Main Street Inn, for a cup of coffee and a light breakfast while they quizzed each other for the test. They had planned it at church the day before, and her mother, Julia, had overheard, so she offered the information to the police. They later that evening questioned Mary, and she said that they went together to the diner and then went on to school. When they got to school, she said she had to use the restroom, but had never come back in to take the test. The test instructor had called her name 3 times, but Peggy had never responded. After the test, she had looked all over the school for her and noticed that her car was still in the parking lot. She enlisted a friend, Mackenzie, who was also on the cheer squad with her and Peggy, to help her look. But when they couldn't find her, Mackenzie offered Mary a ride home. When she got home, Mary said she called the house, hoping that Peggy would answer, but no one did. She figured Peggy would call her later and something serious must have come up. When they later questioned Mackenzie that evening, she confirmed that she had driven Mary home and that they were looking around the school for for Peggy, but they couldn't find her, so she took Mary home. They checked all the bathrooms and all the classes, and she was nowhere to be found. The test instructor, Miss Lucille, said she had seen Peggy come into the school and head to the bathroom, and she said she had plenty of time to make it back in to take the test, but she never came back. She didn't see Peggy pass by the door to head back out of the school. No one in the test that day had seen Peggy in the bathroom, but a boy named Peter Paulson said he saw her talking to an older guy in the stairway. The man had a thick Spanish accent, and he was begging her not to say anything, and Peggy said if he didn't want her to talk, he had to pay her by the end of the day. The man shoved her into the locker and said something in Spanish that he didn't understand, and then he left out the door. He said he asked Peggy if she was okay, and she just laughed it off and said it was her stepdad being crazy. And he just kept walking to get back to the test on time, figuring she was fine. She was last seen by the gym doors with a Spanish man. Peter said he was in his 30s at least, and he had alligator loafers on and a thick cologne. His hair was longer but slicked back. He looked mean and dangerous. No one saw her leave or with who she left with. Her book bag was still on the front seat of her car with her red purse. Her keys were still in the ignition, and one of her white tennis shoes was on the floor of the driver's side by the door. There was a few droplets of blood on the driver's seat floor and on the steering wheel. The driver's side window was all the way down. There was a Winston Light cigarette butt on her passenger's side door floor, and a muddy footprint on the passenger rug. It had been raining that day, and on the passenger side was a bloody handprint on the inside of the doorknob. The trunk had a bag packed along with 2 big stacks of cash. Her fake ID was inside her bag. Mary said the car was still in the same spot they had pulled in when they had arrived at school, and she left her book bag in the car but had brought in the red purse to the test. This is all we had to go on when we showed up. We showed up to the police station and reported what happened to the rest of the staff at the scene, and we got to questioning the family. Paul Morrison, Peggy's father, said he got up 4 a.m. as usual that Monday morning like he did every day to milk the cows and feed the animals. He said he came back in the house around 6 a.m. and his wife Julia had just finished making breakfast, and his son Denny had gotten up around 5 a.m. to help him finish the work before heading back to classes at school that day. Paul said he had to take meat a few towns over and left after breakfast around 7 a.m., and he did not return back to the farm till around noon. He said that Peggy's car was gone and she wasn't due back until 3 p.m., so he just got to work after a light lunch thinking she was at her test. He got done with his work around 5 and he came in to shower while his wife Julia made dinner. Neither of them had heard from Peggy and were discussing if she had any plans. They were both getting concerned. Julia called Mary's house first and then went down the list of all her friends. She had learned that Peggy had skipped the test and her car was still at school, but nobody could find her. They both decided to eat, and give Peggy a little bit more time to come home. She sometimes would do that, but they decided to call when she had not shown up by the time they were done eating and the news came on. Julia said she had a farmer's market booked that day and had packed up the night before. She said she left the house around 7:30 after cleaning up from breakfast, and Peggy had gotten up and was getting in the shower when she left. She had made a breakfast plate for Peggy and put it in the stove and left a note, but Peggy said it was still there when she got home. She never ate it or came home to clean it up. She said she got home around 4 p.m. and had figured Peggy was studying with Mary and forgot what time it was, as she often was late. But after hearing she didn't take the test, she got nervous. Peggy never missed a test. She took her grades very seriously. That's when her mother decided that something bad had happened. Denny, her brother, said he had gotten up that morning around 5 a.m. to help his dad and worked until breakfast around 6. Then he showered and packed up his stuff and left the house around 7:30. He confirmed his sister was getting up and getting in the shower as well. Peggy was due to be last out that day, and she did lock up the door because Paul said he had to unlock it to get back in when he got home at noon. The spare key was in the spot, as she often forgot her key, and she had remembered to put it out. Denny was still in the dorm on campus when his parents called to tell him Peggy was missing and hadn't come home. He drove home, and it only took 15 minutes. None of them said she had left Sunday evening, and she was there in the morning when they all left the house on Monday. All of them had alibis and were cleared of any suspicion in her disappearance rather quickly. All the police had was her car, and it wasn't much to go on with the little things that they found in it. So they decided to search her room, and they found a journal taped to the back of her headboard. They also found a bag of cocaine in a shoebox in her closet, as well as a bag full of lingerie, robes, and sex toys in it. At the bottom was a manila envelope with photos of Peggy with a few different men, all of which seemed to be a lot older than her, and they were clearly having sex in the photos. There was a Spanish male that matched the eyewitness's testimony from school. After reading the very long journal, they had their first suspect, named Diego. Most of this journal was shell-shocking. But before I get into the journal, I'm going to describe the list of suspects, as there are many now, and I will explain with the details in the journal we went through. It took many days to sort her journal. There was a lot of information. The journal had begun on January 1st. It was apparently a tradition of Peggy's to get a new journal every year. So it was January 1st, 1970 until May 30th was the last installment in the journal, 1970. So it's been quite some time. All right, so here's the suspects. We have the entire Bowman family, and I'm going to break it down. Benjamin Bowman is the father. He's also the president of Morrisville College in the town of Morrisville. Blake Bowman is their eldest child. At this time, when Peggy goes missing, he is a senior at Morrisville College. Then there's Benji Bowman. He also attends Morrisville College, but is a sophomore. And then their youngest child, Brad Bowman, who is a senior in high school, the same grade as Peggy. Then there's Mary Matthews, her best friend that lives 1 mile up the street. And I'm sorry, Nancy Bowman, the wife of Benjamin Bowman. She had met her husband at Texas State University, and they both came back to teach. But she ended up becoming the high school principal of Morrisville High School, needing a little separation between career and husband. She was a beloved member of the community and a big member of the church. They were both known as pillars of the community. Then we have Diego Rodriguez. He was a history professor at Morrisville College. At the time this took place, Diego had just earned his 2 years sober. He was also working under an alias and was an illegal immigrant, which they found out through this case. He was married to a psychologist named Lucy. And then Charlie Cruz, he is an art history professor at Morrisville College. So let's get into breaking down Peggy's diary, and we call the bomb shocker, because there is a lot of shocking truths and a lot of investigations into looking into what out of this journal could be proven as truth. And so here we go. We're going to start with the Bowman line. The first shocking details, most of the journal started with normal things, worried about school, friend drama, but then it got interesting when she talked about her first encounter with Benjamin Bowman. According to Peggy's diary, Benjamin had thrown a Super Bowl party during February, so this is 1 month into her journal, when Peggy was in 7th grade. So she was talking about something that had happened to her because their relationship had progressed. So these are the details she expressed. We are surmising it for you. So the first encounter she had with Benjamin Bowman, who is old enough to be her father, by the way, was in 7th grade. He threw a Super Bowl party. He had let Peggy have some wine with the boys, and when she went upstairs to use the bathroom, he brought her into his room and talked her into trying some cocaine. She had seen it on the movies, and she trusted Benjamin, as she called him Ben. She said they did a couple lines, and he made her a mixed drink. She said she left the office and went upstairs to play video games with his sons. When the party was over, Ben told her to come into his room before he took her home. She said he gave her wine and more cocaine and a pill he said would make the experience more relaxing. She said he put a few things in his coat pocket and told her to go to the bathroom before they left. He told his son Brad, who was Peggy's friend at the time, to stay home, that he had to make a stop after dropping Peggy off. But instead he drove to a field near her house and said he wanted to keep the party going. Peggy said she started to get tired, and he told her to lay down in the back of the van. He had put some blankets down and a pillow previously before they left. She was too tired to argue and didn't see anything wrong with it. She laid down, and he came back to sit with her. She said she was not able to move, but she was not asleep. He undressed her, and she said it was very nice, and he only touched her and kissed her with his mouth. Then he dressed her and pleasured himself onto her belly. He took her home and told her parents she had fallen asleep on the ride, and carried her up for them and left. The journal went on to express she had experiences with him in the back of the van all of that 7th grade year, and she openly admitted to falling in love with him and giving him her virginity. But then she said things took a turn when Blake had found out about the two of them and their time in the van. Ben invited Blake to come with them one night. She said they drank a lot and did a lot of cocaine. Then Ben made Blake have sex with Peggy in front of him. She said she refused and said no, but Blake just did it anyway, and then when he was done, Ben did it after, and he was rough and mean and slapped her. She said she stopped coming to the farm, and in 9th grade, Brad started dating Susie, and he stopped trying to save their friendship. She said the summer after junior year, she hung out with Brad most days. Mary and Susie had gone to summer camp, and he was close to home. She told him about his dad and brother, and he told her that his dad made him do that with one of Blake's girlfriends that same year. They bonded over it and started really liking each other. They kept it secret until late fall, when Peggy found out she had gotten pregnant. Brad had to tell his dad, and they took Peggy to a clinic and paid for her to have an abortion. She said a few weeks after she had the abortion, Blake had followed her home from school. Instead of being mean, he was kind to her. He apologized for what he was forced to do and told Peggy that his dad had made him watch while he slept with all the babysitters he ever had as a kid. He said he was sick just like him, and it tore him apart that he had hurt her. Brad went back to Susie and broke it off for good, and Peggy liked the attention from Blake, and they started seeing each other and sleeping together over the winter. But when Blake's girlfriend Kelly started accusing him of having an affair, like Brad, he dumped Peggy and stopped coming around. In the springtime, Benji started coming home with her brother, and even went with them on their family spring break trip to Florida. And when her brother fell asleep, Benji would come hang out with her, and they started dating and having sex. He was really sweet, and she said he never hurt her, but he was too afraid Denny would find out, and right before her senior prom, he broke it off with her. She said it broke her heart to be rejected by all the Bowman men, and despite it all, she loved all of them. She longed to be a part of their family. A piece of their journal also expressed that on more than one occasion, Nancy Bowman had caught her with her sons. The first time she caught Peggy sleeping with her sons was with Brad. It was during the 4th of July barbecue. They had snuck into the woods and were very drunk. She said they were against a tree, and she saw Nancy ducking near a tree and watching them. She told Brad to stop, and Nancy ran back up the trail. He said not to worry, that he would talk to her about it. Nancy never said a word the next day and didn't treat her any differently, so Peggy said she just let it go. That same year over Christmas, she was with Blake, and they thought everyone was asleep. They snuck into his room, and his door was open slightly. She said she watched Nancy watching through the doorway for a few minutes, but then just walked to the door and lightly shut it before walking down the hall. Blake said the same thing, that he would talk to her, and again Nancy never acted like she knew anything and never brought it up. When she was with Benji over Easter, they snuck out to the garage. Nancy had come out to get more wine and saw them. Benji told her to go on, like a dog. Peggy had stated that he spoke to her very demeaning. Again, Nancy did not say a word and just left the garage. She wrote a week before her disappearance that Nancy had told her she was going back to Texas for a little while. She said things with Ben were bad, and she thought he had been sleeping with the young girls at college. She said she found pictures in his closet and planned to confront him over the weekend while the boys were busy on a trip with baseball. Peggy went on to say that Nancy was not willing to share, and when she finds out who Ben is sleeping with, that she would put a stop to it then and there. Peggy wrote that Nancy left to pick up wine for their dinner party that night. Ben was having a new professor over for dinner with his wife. While she was waiting for Brad to come back before they were working on a She was at the house waiting for Brad to come back because they were working on a science project together when Nancy left to pick up more wine. Ben came in shortly after Nancy left. She said that Ben had taken her into the study, and she warned him that Nancy knew he was sleeping with girls at school and that she had found the photos. She said he just shrugged and said he would straighten it out and shouldn't fret about her crazy antics. He told her to ignore her like the rest of the family did. He said Nancy was cold to him and wouldn't touch him for years. Peggy felt bad for him, and they did some cocaine in his study and had a drink. She wrote that he missed her, that she was the best he ever had, and that they had wild, passionate sex on the desk after he confessed his love. The first few days leading up to her disappearance, things were getting intense. She wrote that Nancy had moved out 1 week before she went missing. She took a flight back to Dallas, that Ben had taken her to the airport, and he told her he saw her off, wearing disguises. Peggy admitted to spying on them, and she knew that Nancy was finally gone. After Nancy left, they drove to the beach and got some food. Then they got a room in a motel off the thruway. He called home and said he was working late and told the boys to order pizza and that Nancy had flew home to visit her family. She said they spent the night together, and he told her to come over, that he was making dinner the next night because he had special plans for the two of them. She wrote that she was finally going to be a Bowman. The next day was Tuesday, but unlike her hopeful message the day before, this one was disturbingly sad. She said she went shopping with Blake when she arrived, and he got wine and liquor and beer. She said she came home with Blake to make the meal. Blake made her a drink, and they smoked weed while they were having a good time while she was cooking. She said He said Kelly was away for the weekend, which was Blake's girlfriend at the time. Benji came home next. He said that his girlfriend Nina was busy and had also canceled, and like Blake, was being very sweet and affectionate to her, serving her drinks. Then Brad came in, and she was relieved Susie was not with him. They all hung out. The boys set the table. Then Ben came home next, and he told her to go upstairs and to take a shower while he finished up the rest. He said he left a dress for her on the bed. She said he bought her a designer dress with shoes and a bra and panty set. She did as he asked, thinking he was going to tell the guys they were finally together. She wrote that she felt special and loved and like she had finally come home. They ate dinner and laughed. All of them were complimenting her, and she said they were all very handsy that night. After dinner, he told her to go into the living room with the boys. She said he went to get his camera. She went on to describe that Ben told her they would all be sharing her, that it would bring the family closer. At that moment she tried to run, but they all stopped her. When she realized there was no getting away, she asked for more drugs first, and they obliged. She said they took turns and beat her most of the night, and then made her shower before taking her home. They told her if she told anyone, they would kill her. There was no more journal entries until Friday night, the night of senior prom. She had left school at 10 a.m. with Mary to go to the mall. She didn't plan to go to prom, but Mary convinced her they should go as it was the last dance of their high school career. Her parents had given her some money that morning and told her she shouldn't pass up on the high school tradition. They found dresses and shoes and jewelry to wear, and they both got their hair done and their makeup done and their nails painted at the salon in the mall. Then they had lunch in the food court and bumped into Brad and Susie. She said she tried to make excuses, but Brad cornered her near the bathrooms and reminded her what would happen if anyone found out, and that they would be wanting another dinner soon. She left the mall with Mary and went to her house to get ready. She started drinking to numb the fear she was feeling, and she said she left around 6 p.m. with Mary to go to the reservation at the Tavern Inn in town. She said she ate a meal with Mary and a few girls from cheer team and was starting to feel better until Brad walked in with Susie. Peggy wrote that Susie had been giving her dirty looks from across the restaurant and would start talking to Brad and laugh. She said they were clearly talking about her, and she feared that Brad had told her about them. She said if Susie found out, she would tell everyone, and her reputation would be ruined, and her family would disown her for embarrassing them. She said she snuck into the bathroom and did some cocaine in the stall, and she said her heart was racing. Peggy said they left shortly after to go to prom, and that Susie and Brad hadn't said anything to her at the at the restaurant. At prom, she took pictures with Mary and her friends and kept sneaking off to do more cocaine and drinking in the stalls. She said that Brad was watching her all night. She wanted to skip his after party, but everyone she drove wanted to go. She said she wanted to get home by her 1 a.m. curfew, so she was leaving the party at midnight. Mary went in, and Peggy said she was busy getting drinks, so Peggy found the pantry in Brad's kitchen that she had snuck in several times with one of them to do cocaine. She broke up some lines and was about to do it when Blake opened the door and came in. She told him she didn't want any trouble. He was calm, and she said they just did coke, and he asked about prom and told her she looked beautiful. She said he loved her and that she was special to him, and he had a really nice time over the holidays with her. He asked if he could give her a kiss, but she said no, not tonight, that she just wanted to be friends. She said he got pissy when she refused to and pushed her hard into the shelf. She said she bruised her elbow. He grabbed her face and said if she knew what was good for her, she'd kiss him and enjoy it. She said she was scared, and she just shut her eyes and pretended it was anyone else and did as Blake asked. He forced her to give him oral sex and to swallow his mess, she said. She wrote that she felt like a prostitute and curled in a ball and cried when Blake left. She wrote she was their walking sex toy, and she wouldn't be free until she got out of town. She wrote she would get out and never look back again. She said the Bowmans would kill her if she stayed. They also read a lot about Peggy's secret feelings about Mary. She called her Saint Teresa and was very jealous of how devoted Mary was to her faith, and she said Mary embarrassed her when she went on with her religious antics and tirades at school or at parties. She said she felt judged all the time by Mary, and she had to pretend to be perfect around her. She said Mary was a cutter and wanted to get her help, but when she said she wanted to get her help, Mary threatened to tell everyone that she was cutting her. She said Mary was going nuts about the pressure at school, and she said her parents were going to get a divorce. Her father was home every night with them, but her mom was drinking a lot and coming home late, and her father wanted to send her to some rehab, and they were going to say she went to see her mom. Her dad said he would file for separation if she didn't go. Peggy thought Mary was delusional. It's like she lived in a world that had to be perfect all the time. Her parents had to be perfect and have a perfect marriage. Her brother had to be perfect and be the older protective brother and graduate as the local hero. Peggy said she had to be the perfect, saintly best friend that Mary expected, or she would just make life unbearable. She wrote that Mary got everything she wanted. She never accepted no or defeat, and she was malicious and revengeful in her antics. Peggy said a lot about Susie, and with it brought a whole nother side to the case. Susie had a squeaky clean image as well. She was cheer captain, but according to Peggy, she was called Queen Bitch, who ruled with an iron fist. Susie loved to pick on Peggy. Every day she made fun of her and then would laugh and say she was just kidding around. Susie was always trying to do better than Peggy and vice versa. They hated each other, but had all the same friends and had to make it work. But Susie and Peggy also made a lot of money together. Around the time Peggy broke up with Ben Bowman the first time, Peggy started going clubbing with Susie with fake IDs. Susie came from a poor family, and she had an expensive taste. She, as in Susie, was an escort. When they wanted 2 girls, Peggy came and made a little pocket money at first. Peggy said she started to love the money and being able to buy nice things, but she was mostly saving to get out of Morrisville. Peggy met Charlie at the club, who was also a professor at the local community college of Morrisville. He was newly divorced. He saw his kids 2 weekends a month. He paid for her companionship, and she wrote that he was the smartest man she had ever met. He was so romantic and a great lay, pretty much. He made her amazing meals and bought her designer things, and although he paid for it, she said he made love to her. They met 2 times a week for 6 months, but had no contact outside of his home, and they never went out anywhere public. She also met a fellow named Diego, a Spanish professor at Morrisville College, and she said he had an apartment near campus that he kept just for his hobbies. She wrote he was into domination and said it was scary at first, but he never abused her and he tipped very well. She met him 1 time a week for about 5 months, according to her journal. Diego was married and Mormon, and no one could ever find out about his extracurricular activities. She described it as a sex dungeon, and on occasion she would strip or dance at his sex parties for good money and tips. Between her escort money and what she earned on the farm, she had managed to save $5,000 by the time she went missing. She also briefly mentioned that she had caught her father in the barn on their property with a teen boy, and they were having sex. She said she watched the entire time in disbelief. Her father was so devotedly religious and so devoted to her mother, but she said she understood where her desires came from in that moment. She also at one point around the new year described catching her mom in a lie. She had said she was going to her sewing circle on a weekday, and she said she had seen her mom pulling into the motel outside of town where she was meeting a client that night. She said her mom knocked on a room and a man answered. When Peggy went to leave her escort call, her mother's car was still there, so she decided to wait. She saw her mother kiss a man and get back in the car. She waited for the man to leave, wanting to see his face, and she was shocked to find out that it was the pastor of her church and Mary's dad. Peggy was spiraling at this point. She said nothing was real and everything was fake and everyone was pretending. She said she didn't feel guilty for falling in love with an older man, but she stopped degrading herself about the work she did. At least she was getting out, she said. The last thing she wrote in her journal was Sunday night, and it was very brief. She said she had her math final in the morning, and it was going to be the hardest of all her tests, and she hoped she did well. She never finished writing. It was dated for 10 p.m. The police were hit with a lot of things in Peggy's journal, and they needed to find proof that what she had written was true, or else it was just hearsay. First, they looked at Benjamin Bowman, the dean of Morrisville College. If they could find a girl to come forward that proved he was sleeping with women at the college, there would be room to bring him in for questioning. It didn't take much surveillance to discover Benjamin had a thing for younger ladies. Their first week watching him, they had photographed him kissing a young freshman outside of his office, and then a second woman by his car on campus, and a third one by her car on campus. They were able to speak to the girls on campus at separate times. A freshman, Lainey Green, said he passed her that semester because she gave him oral pleasure after hours and she had to pay him $100 or he would fail her. She said she had struggled and just wanted to be done with the class and with him, so she did it. She refused to testify as it would damage her career, so they dug a little deeper on Ben. The other two women denied anything sexual was going on, and they brushed off any further communication. So they changed tactics and looked into anyone that year that had bad grades most of the semester and still had passed their exams. They found 3 women after looking at his grade books, which they were able to review with Lainey's help. She had stolen the book and took it to the library and made photocopies of all of the semesters that year and brought it to the station. A girl, Marge Santiago, said that Benjamin had been tutoring her in the first part of the semester because her English was bad. He also spoke Spanish, so he could translate for her as well. She thought he was very sweet, and her grades did get better. Then one day, in the tutoring session, he asked her to unbutton her blouse, and she said she was not going to do that, and he slapped her and forced himself on her. He said after it was done, if she told anyone, he would make sure she never finished college or got into another college anywhere else again. She said she would testify in court, and she thinks that if Benjamin had anything to do with Peggy's disappearance, then Peggy needed her help. It was enough to bring him in, and they made sure to arrest him on campus, hoping other women would come forward like Marge. It worked. 4 women came forward. All were raped and threatened. The cops pressed Benjamin about Peggy. He admitted to sleeping with her in the fall of the last year. He said she had gotten obsessive and that she was showing up at his office and calling his house, so he had to put an end to it, and she continued to stalk him for weeks. And he found out that she had seduced his youngest son, Brad, and was seeing him to make him jealous. He said she was crazy and told his son that he needed to dump her and focus on his relationship with Susie, and he listened. But then she started to date his oldest son during the holidays, and she did it to be at the events with Ben and his family. He said she was threatening to kill Nancy in her sleep, and he kept her happy by pretending to watch them together. It was creepy. So creepy, even Blake dumped her. And to his surprise, she started to see Benji, who didn't take long before he got creeped out too. He was happy to be gone and done with her after she had dated all of his sons. Benjamin defended himself in court, and without any physical proof of the rapes, his defense won. Within 60 days, Benjamin Bowman was back to work as dean of the college. The women who came forward refused to have anything further to do with court or the case. The police found out that the eldest son, Blake, had been smoking Winston Lights, and he had a pair of money boots that matched the prints found in Peggy's car. They arrested Blake, also on campus. Blake admitted bumping into her in the stairway and they went to smoke a cigarette in her car before she had to take the test. He said he was there dropping Brad off for his exam and saw her and wanted to see how she was. She said she had to get back, so he got out and went to his truck and left. He said he had to work that day at the pizza shop in town. He was confirmed to be working 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. He said it was a very long day. He was cleared as a suspect, but he was listed as the last person at that point to see Peggy alive. He said while he was driving away, he saw a Spanish man talking to Peggy on the sidewalk. He thought it was a teacher telling her to get inside for the exam. Diego was already in custody. As an illegal immigrant with no green card, they held him. He admits to hiring Peggy for sex work, but did not know she was a minor. She had an ID and a different name, Liv, and she was 23 according to the ID. He said she was blackmailing him for $5,000. She wanted to get out of town faster than she expected, and she had photos and was going to send them to his wife and turn him into immigration. He agreed to pay her the $5,000 and met her at her car before her test. He said he tried to reason with her in the hall in the school before, but she would not budge, so he went to get the money and met her at her car and gave it to her. She put it in a bag in her trunk, which explained the big rolls of money they found. He said as he was walking away from the car, he saw a man with a leather jacket and boots approach her. He slammed her into the car and was demanding to know who Diego was and what they were talking about. He slapped Peggy and she was crying, but he kept walking. She had just blackmailed him and he wanted no more involvement with her. He assumed he was her boyfriend or another person she was blackmailing. He ID'd the person as Blake Bowman from the pictures. The police backtracked on Blake's day. He clocked in at 11 a.m., but didn't make his first delivery until afternoon. His boss said he usually sat in his car and smoked, but he said that day that he had to fuel up that he forgot for his shift and was gone a full hour. His job was only 2 blocks from where Peggy was parked at the school. He stayed too busy all the rest of the night to be able to escape on any more breaks. He said he was with his girlfriend Kelly after work. He went to his apartment and showered and picked her up about 12:30 a.m., he said, from a sorority party she was attending. He said they came back to his place and he drove her home around 3 a.m. Then he went to bed. The police went to speak to Kelly. She said he had picked her up from the party around 2 a.m. She called him because her friend was drunk. He took her right home, she said, and was mad at her for disturbing his sleep. They brought Blake back in and re-questioned him. He admitted he saw Peggy exchange something with Diego, but he thought it was drugs. He said he was trying to help her get clean, but she kept using. She told them she had to get away, but that there was bad people out to get her, and she asked for his help. She got in the truck with him, and she asked him to take her to the bus station. She said she forgot her bag when they got there, so he bought a ticket to Rochester and gave her some cash for food. She said she would be back for her money later that night. He waited while she got on the bus. He said she never came back. He said he was scared if he told anyone, the people after her would find him. At this point, the police did not believe him. No ticket was punched by anyone matching his or Peggy's names or descriptions that day or night. Blake was suspect number 1, but they had to find evidence Peggy was harmed or being held against her will. Otherwise, she was just still a runaway. Diego was also still a suspect. The money was taken out of his account that morning in town at 9 a.m. The exact amount of $5,000 was found in the bag in the trunk, and they found the manila envelope in Diego's car of them having sex. The photos of them having sex, which confirmed she gave it to him when he paid her off. They got the phone call log from Peggy's room phone and her house phone and Diego's house phone as well, and they had spoken 2 times on Sunday before dinner time, which he said was when she told him to meet her at the school the next day. They spoke again at 7 a.m. on Monday morning like he said. Diego had made it to his first lecture at 11:45 that morning. They didn't think it was enough time for him to do anything with Peggy unless he had hid her at his secret sex apartment. They got a search warrant. They found several sex entrapments and costumes and toys. There was large amounts of cocaine and marijuana and alcohol. They found bloody bandages in the trash and Peggy's jean skirt she had been wearing Monday morning. It had blood on the back with bloody underwear in the trash. Diego said she had gotten her period after fighting with the man at school, and he gave her some shorts and a ride back to school. He said she threw her stuff in the trash, but the police were not buying it. He found letters between Peggy and Diego in the closet, and it lasted over 7 months. It proved that Peggy was a working call girl, but there were photos of her, and she was underage. Diego was arrested for rape of a minor. With the evidence in his apartment, the DA pushed to close the case, and they pressed Diego, but he swore he did nothing to her. With no body, they couldn't go for murder, but they charged him with rape of a minor, and he was deported after serving 2 years in prison. The police kept looking for Peggy, but since there was no evidence that she died and no body and no further leads, they listed her as an addicted teen who ran away. Her parents were so devastated they tried everything to get the case reopened, but no one was interested in it. They said her parents were in denial that their daughter was a drug addict and a sex worker who ran away. By 1974, even her parents decided they had nowhere to go. Her father, Paul, believed the Bowman family took her, and was convinced that they had buried her on their land, and he often snuck on the farm to try to find a grave. Her mother believed Diego hurt Peggy and killed her and put her body somewhere, and she prayed every day he would confess. Denny, Peggy's brother, graduated from Morrisville, and he took over the farm because his parents couldn't stand to live near the Bowmans any longer. They retired to a community for seniors in Tampa, Florida, but they never got over Peggy. Peggy's mother talked about her to anyone who would listen. Julia Morrison died in 1978 from a car accident. It was Christmas Eve and she had been drinking. The person she hit lived and was unharmed, but she died instantly. Denny was devastated and his father, Paul, moved back to the farm. In 1981, his father, Paul, had a heart attack and passed away while doing his morning chores. Denny never stopped looking for Peggy. He kept up on Jane Does and crimes in the area, and he often drove to where the homeless were, looking to see if she was there. Denny got married in 1982, a local girl with a big family from Greece. They filled up the farmhouse again. Mary Matthews went to Georgetown, and she never stopped searching for Peggy. She called hospitals weekly and always checked in with the police every year to see if anything new came up. She became a pastor like her father and took over the local church so her dad could cut back on his hours. She married a local farmer and had land of her own, and she brought her family with her. And her family no longer worked on the Morrison farm. Like Paul, Mary believed the Bowmans had taken her and killed Peggy. Brad went to Notre Dame with Susie Saunders. They married in senior year when Brad was drafted to play for the New York Jets. They moved to Jersey and started a family. Brad played pro for 2 years before being cut from the team. They moved to Texas and he got a job coaching football at Texas State University. They had 3 kids before divorcing in 1983. Susie moved back home to Morrisville with their 3 kids and took over her family's restaurant in town, living in the same apartment she grew up above it. She never gave up being an escort and was arrested 3 times for prostitution in 1970. But she never served any time. Mackenzie Fairway became police chief in Morrisville after serving her country in the Air Force. Peggy's case was said to always be on her desk. She never stopped trying to find more evidence. Blake, Benji, and Benjamin Bowman never left Morrisville. Ben continued to be the dean of Morrisville. Benji opened an auto shop in town, and Blake became a beer delivery driver in the area. Nancy and Benjamin stayed married until 1980. She left him and moved to Michigan for a while, but she returned to Morrisville and Benjamin in December of 1984. They remarried and had a baby, even though Nancy was in her mid-40s. They had a son named Benson Bowman. Nancy said she was saved when she got pregnant with Benson. They had been trying for years. She said Ben came back to God in 1984 and he was a changed man. He even gave up drinking and focused on work. Nancy stayed home and got to dote on Benson. They also never left Morrisville either. The case would stay stagnant until the 15-year high school reunion of Morrisville High School in 1985. And that's where we will begin part 2. I hope you like it so far. See you next time.